Good evening, everybody. That was pretty good. You guys responded quickly. So my name is Steve Eubing, and I am the director of the Center for Urban Education Success at the Warner School of Education at the University of Rochester. Try to say that 3 times fast. Really pleased that you're here. Want to start with some important housekeeping. In case of an emergency or a fire or smoke, please realize there are exits to your rear, to my right, your left, to my left, your right. We also have 3 translators in the room, one for Nepali, one for Spanish, and one for Arabic. And if you would like to take advantage of those services, there are earphones in the back, and they will translate for you. Additionally, somebody lost their glasses. So I'm going to actually step down from, this could be from 3rd period today in school too. When I step down today, if you think they're yours, raise your hand and I'll bring them over to you. We have a kind of an interesting opportunity for you today. In response to Dr. Noguera's talk, there'll be 2 opportunities to give comments or ask questions. One is by tweeting them at hashtag URCES17. I'll say that again, URCES17. This hashtag appears at the screen behind me and at the bottom of your programs. And for those of you who would like, we have note cards at a table outside the auditorium where you can give feedback about the event. And we'd really appreciate your feedback. So this is this journey of the Warner School being involved in East High School has gone on for several years. Actually, this is the 3rd year I've been involved. And I must say the inspiration for this journey was our university president, who asks us all the time to think big thoughts about big things and to do the right thing when it's presented. So without further ado, to welcome us today and introduce the program, our president, Dr. Joel Seligman.
I am so delighted to be at East High School, with whom we have a partnership with which we are trying to create one of the strongest public high schools of its sort in the nation. And through the Center on Urban Education Success, we're trying to understand what we learned from this experience, how we can communicate it to others. The issues involved in K through 12 are in some respects the most important in education today. Our system of education in this country is not equally good in all places in the country. It is one that gets bound up with questions of class, of race. It is one that gets bound up, particularly in some cities such as ours, with questions of poverty. And these are questions that to some degree, post-secondary institutions, as we call colleges and universities, are less exposed to. I have found in the experience of working with Steve and Sean Nelms and Joanne Larson and so many others at East High School, and then with our wonderful dean at the Warner School, Raffaella Barassi, that this has been one of the great educations for me. This is the front line of perhaps the greatest social challenge we face in the 21st century. How do we truly create an inclusive society? How do we create, as Pedro Noguera puts it in the title of a recent book, excellence through equity? And the issues are complex and they're hard. What I have learned, or am beginning to really fully grasp, is how much perseverance, how much patience, how much listening to people is absolutely essential to it. How much it is critical not to impose solutions on individuals, but make everyone part of the solution. And our experiment at East High School, as Steve so aptly explained, it's a very young experiment. This is the end of the 2nd year of implementation. We have many years to go. But under Sean Nelms' leadership, working with fabulous faculty and administrative team. We've started to make some progress, and I think Sean would probably be the first to say it is a continuing learning experience for all of us. What I want to say on behalf of the University of Rochester is we are committed to East High School. We're committed to it because we are the University of Rochester, and we care about everyone in this city. We're now the largest employer in the region with close to 30,000 employees, and it matters to us that we try to do everything we can to create greater K-12 opportunities, greater efforts to address urban poverty, greater efforts to address healthcare in our region, among other challenges. I've said enough for now. As I explained to Pedro Noguera, I'd written 45 minutes in my introduction, but I probably won't deliver them all, because you're really here to hear him and to formally introduce our wonderful speaker. Let me invite Sean Nelms, who is the current ultimate leader in East High School and hopefully will be for the balance of the century. Big round of applause for Sean.
Thanks. It is indeed an honor and privilege to introduce one of the most respected thought leaders in the field of education, Dr. Pedro Noguera. In 2006, I officially became a Pedro groupie when I read his article, A Critical Response to Michael Fullen's The Future of Educational Change, Systems Link Thinkers in Action. Pedro's response acknowledged Fullen's incredible work in the field as one of his transformative leaders, but argued that many claims associated with school reform omit the realities of urban and rural schools. In his critique, Pedro wrote, "To claim that these ideas have little relevance to such systems is clearly a significant charge, for the institutions where poor children are concentrated are typically the most troubled and the ones most frequently regarded as failures. They fail because they show little ability to carry out the central objective for which they were created, namely educating children. And they fail because they do not serve as a source of opportunity and path to social mobility that the poor so desperately need. This is the case in nearly every major city in the United States, where there is clear evidence of chronic and pervasive failure. Were this critique applicable to only a small number of cases, the validity of Fullen's arguments could not be called into question. But the districts to which I'm referring serve approximately 1/3 of the school-aged children in the United States. And in such places, the central leadership challenge is not just the sustainability and adaptability of effective educational practices, but rather how to contend with the manifold effects of poverty within the social context and within the organizational apparatus of the district themselves. Pedro was not attacking a colleague. He was asking critical questions that are seldomly asked in urban and rural centers. Dr. Noguera was representing a group of marginalized students and the conditions that might impede their academic, social, and academic development. He was providing context for the incredible urban and rural staffs that often struggle working in systems that inadequately address the societal barriers that prevent students from reaching their full potential. Pedro was doing what each of us should challenge ourselves to do. We must become guardians of equity. We must guard against racial segregation. We must guard against inequity in funding of our schools. We must guard against systemic conditions that lead to poverty. And we must guard against opportunity gaps that exist in our modern-day caste system. In 2015, the State Education Department agreed to allow the University of Rochester to become the guardian of equity for East. I want to applaud our staff, scholars, and community advocates for providing incredible opportunities for our youth. Will our East EPO teaching, support, and university staff members please stand and remain standing to be recognized? Thank you. Look around the room. This is your network of support. Collectively, we all can make schools better. An auditorium packed with thoughtful leaders on day one of the NBA Finals. It's really true commitment. This event is the first in a series of community dialogues hosted by CUES, or the Center for Urban Education Success. The center is designed to support the success of K-12 urban schools, both locally and nationally, through a combination of clinical and academic research, relationship building with other institutions, and a commitment to pursue and share best practices. To learn more about CUES, I encourage you to visit our website at www.cues.org. We encourage you also to tweet your questions and comments tonight at hashtag #URQ17. I will select several questions from the audience and pose them to Dr. Noguera at the end of today's lecture. You may also leave handwritten notes and questions at the index table in the back, the cards in the back of index cards. We are fortunate to have you join us today, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Pedro Noguera.
Good evening. It is truly a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Superintendent Nelms for inviting me, and just say it's been great to see that a leader of his caliber has taken on this work. I also want to thank President Seligman and all the faculty and staff from the University of Rochester, particularly Joanne Larson, who's been such a great communicator about getting me here, because there aren't many universities in the country doing the work that's happening here. If you think about it, the university has staked its incredible reputation on getting this school to become a place that this community can be proud of. I know from having worked at great universities in other places that that is not something that's typical. I often point out to a lot of people, they don't even know at Columbia that they're in Harlem. In fact, they build walls to keep Harlem out. When I lived in Cambridge and taught at Harvard, I used to think, between Harvard and MIT, most of the real estate is owned by these two great universities. Why aren't the schools of Cambridge the best in the country? And they're not. And that's because more often than not, there are walls that separate the university from the community. And the resources that are there, the intellectual resources, not available to the community. And so I want to applaud the university for this work, and I want to hope that it will become a model that other universities will embrace too, because we have a paradox that doesn't make sense in this country, and that is that we have excellent institutions of higher education and very mediocre schools throughout the country. How could that be? How could we allow the farm system that feeds us, our college students, to become so weak? Well, that's because there has been a deliberate disinvestment in urban schools, particularly throughout the country. Just think about this place. This is, I've been told, the oldest high school in the city. I would bet that there are many people who went to this school right now, who live here, but would not put their children here. What happened? What changed? It's not simply the population served. It's what is offered here. Because you have a model of a school right close by at the School of the Arts that demonstrates you that when there's quality, you can get an integrated school. Why didn't we continue to make investments in quality as the population changed? And those are the questions I think we've got to ask ourselves if we're going to do this. Use education as a means to break the cycle of poverty. That's not the question we've been asking as a nation. We've been focused on how to close the achievement gap, which sounds good, until you realize that all the disparities that we see in achievement mirror disparities in health, in wealth, in housing. That is, it's part of a bigger pattern. The achievement gap is just an educational manifestation of inequality. That's what it is. And so, unless we start to address the opportunity gaps, we're not going to see a change in outcomes. And that's what I want to talk about today, and I want to start by apologizing. Because Sue Meyer, who's on the faculty and working hard here, said, you said it was easy, but we've made it hard. I don't think it's easy. It's not easy. It's not easy to make a school like this work well, to create a culture that's conducive to good teaching and learning. Not easy to do at all. However, I would say this. Every child starts to learn from the time they're born. Every child. The most common question of every 3-year-old of any background is why? They want to know why. That's a higher order question, isn't it? And what does that tell you about the curiosity that's innate in children? Now ask yourself, why is it that that curiosity is often driven out of our kids? Why is it that so few of our kids read on their own? Why is it that education often results in kids who are turned off to learning, who describe school as boring? There's something fundamentally wrong with what we've been doing, and I would say that part of it is that we've been fixated on the wrong things. And so I want to use my time with you tonight to try to redirect the conversation onto some of the right things. And I recognize in doing that, I have to acknowledge that we have a political problem. And it didn't start with Donald Trump. We have a bipartisan problem in American education that has led us to believe that we could simply fix schools by pressuring them, by threatening to fire principals and fire teachers. I was on the radio today, the local NPR affiliate, and people described the union as the mob. And Michelle Rhee, as many of us know, said if we simply fired the bad teachers, we could fix this. As if she knows who those people are. As if there are some great teachers just waiting for their chance. It's a fallacy. We pursue the wrong strategies. I'm visiting the state of Florida, and the state of Florida puts letter grades on their schools. Now that idea, you know where it came from? It came from LA County. Except it started with restaurants. They put letter grades on restaurants to let you know how clean it is inside. If you go to a C restaurant, you better be very hungry. Right? Well, they decided in Florida they're going to bring that idea under Jeb Bush to the schools. They put letter grades on the schools. Now, I would think that the state puts an F on the school and still allows the children to go. The state should be sued because they know the school is failing and they still let it go on. So I visit Edison High School in Miami. It's a triple F school. And I asked the principal, how do you get to be triple F? He said, well, you simply failed the state exam 3 years in a row. I said, well, what happens if you fail again? He says, well, the state says they'll take us over. I said, are you worried about being taken over? He said, not at all. He said, because I'm going to quit at the end of this year. And everybody described him as committed and hardworking, but he was tired of being beaten down. He said, 85% of our kids don't speak English. They haven't been in the country long enough to pass an exam in English. He says, do you think the state of Florida is holding back on some recipe that they will now make available to our school if they take us over? What's the record of state takeovers? One of abysmal failure. New York State's been in control of Roosevelt schools for how long? Almost 20 years? Has the state figured out what to do in Roosevelt yet? Not at all. State of New Jersey. Every urban district is under state control with the exception of Elizabeth. When is the last time you heard Chris Christie say that the schools that he's responsible for are failing because of his leadership? You'll never hear it because we have a system of top-down accountability which holds the people with the most power the least accountable. That, to me, is a part of the problem. We keep thinking that there's a gimmick out there that we can use to fix schools, and I know someone trying to tell me there's an easy button that's a gimmick that works. I don't believe it. There are no gimmicks. Los Angeles spent $1 billion on iPads. $1 billion of money they didn't even have. Didn't even spend any of the money to train teachers on how to teach with using the iPads. Didn't even make sure that kids couldn't get on Facebook in class with the iPads. But they said, oh no, technology is going to be this great innovation that'll drive success. Guess what? It's never that simple. And anybody who tells you that it is, that if you just do this, if you just create more charter schools, just do vouchers, if you just do this, it'll all get better, they clearly don't understand what's going on here. Because what we know about school success in America is that where poverty is concentrated, almost always schools fail. And why do they fail? Because we don't give the schools the resources to address the other issues that come and accompany poverty. And then it gets compounded by some other things that happens within schools. Robert Putnam, political scientist at Harvard, wrote a book, Our Kids. He describes going back to his hometown of Clinton, Ohio, hometown right there on Lake Erie, that when he was growing up and graduated in 1964, it sent 80% of the kids to college. Working class kids. He goes back 50 years later and he finds a community in shambles, schools that don't work. And he asks, what happened? How could my community that produced such a number of great doctors and lawyers and professionals now be a place that anyone who can tries to flee from? That's not a Clinton, Ohio story, that's an American story. And so the issues you're facing in Rochester are very similar to issues we're seeing throughout the country. And I say they're an American issue because Canada doesn't have them. All you have to do is cross the border, and you can do it easily, can't you? And you will find that Canada's figured this out. Canada doesn't have ghettos like we do. Go to Windsor. Windsor is right across the river from Detroit. And you will find a thriving, stable black community right across from what was once the 10th largest city in the country that is now a wasteland. This is an American problem, rooted in our history, rooted in the structure of our society that has allowed us to maintain segregated schools, segregated not just by race but by class, and not just by law but by practice. And so not surprising, as poverty rates have risen, we've seen school failure climb. And too often we say the school should solve it. And we know that when we do that, we're in effect expecting schools and teachers to be social workers and counselors and take on jobs that they're not even qualified for, much less have the time to do. Instead, we blame them. We blame the teachers. We blame the administrators. We blame the district. And what does that do? It contributes to a spiral downward. We say everyone who can should flee. Maybe we should just get rid of the whole thing. Just get rid of it. Believe it or not, that's what we've done in New Orleans. That's what's happened in New Orleans. That's what's happened in Detroit. After Katrina, Arne Duncan said that Katrina was the best thing to ever happen to schools in New Orleans. But look at the contrast. Within a year of Hurricane Katrina, the Superdome, which housed hundreds of people who lost their homes, was hosting the Saints in the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, the lower Ninth Ward didn't get a school open for over 10 years. Why? Because we love football more than we love kids, especially if they're poor and black. Does that sound crude? Or does it sound like the truth? I said it on the radio today that we love football more than we love the kids. I know that there are many people out there who love those losing Buffalo Bills more than they love the kids. I heard someone say it. But we will invest public dollars even on losing teams. Dollars that we won't spend. When it comes to the kids, we get, we're spending too much already. You can't just keep throwing money at the problem. And so a lot of this is political. It's political because we don't have the will to do the work. We don't address issues like segregation, inequality in funding, poverty, the gaps in opportunity. The gaps in opportunity that are so clear as soon as you visit a suburban public school or private school. When you take kids from the inner city and get them to see what other kids are getting, they come away shocked, and sometimes they come away angry. Because now they know, and they see it up close. And so we have to stop pretending that we have done all we can. And we haven't. We've barely done anything. We've barely done anything. Except to blame Blame the kids, blame their parents, blame their teachers, and guess what? All the blame in the world will not get us any closer to a solution. But the politics of blame has got us stuck. It's got us stuck. And so I describe the current debate in America between a narrow approach and a broader approach. And the narrow approach is winning. The narrow approach leads us to believe that we can pressure schools into improvement. We can threaten teachers and principals, and that'll get them better. We can use competition and choice as a lever for change, even though in our minds we know there will always be losers and always be kids in schools that no one wants to choose. Because choice only works when every school is worth choosing. The narrow approach leads us to use testing as a weapon. New York's been great at that, haven't they? That's why we have a huge opt-out movement. Instead of using it as a tool. The narrow approach treats parents as consumers. Now, I've been an advocate of what we call the broad approach, more holistic approach. I'm going to come back to it because that approach, although it's not popular, although it's not been embraced by many state governments and certainly not by the federal government, it does exist in certain communities around the country. And it calls for a more holistic way of thinking about kids. Recognize that you can't separate the academic needs of a child from their emotional and psychological and physical needs because they're all in the same person. Hungry kids don't do well in school. And the broader approach says, instead of treating parents like consumers, we have to treat them like partners. Because we've known for a long time that when there's trust between the schools and the parents, kids do better academically because they're more likely to reinforce the learning at home. And the broad approach says, we can't just focus on the test. We have to make sure the kids get a well-rounded education that includes art and music and science and recess and phys ed. I saw a study that says that eating lunch was good for test scores, and I said, thank God. Or they might take lunch from the kids. No, the broad approach says we've got to think about this differently. But as I said, we are losing. We're losing because we keep thinking that schools can solve the problems of poverty by themselves. We have no evidence that it'll work, but we have lots of people out there who should know better, who continue to push us down this path. Now, you probably can't see it from where you stand, but here's a quote from an editorial that was in the Washington Post written by Joel Klein, who at the time was Chancellor of Schools in New York City. Michael Lomax, the head of the United Negro College Fund, and Janet Murguia, who was with the National Council de la Raza. These are people who, based on their life experience and their work, know poverty is an issue. Here's what they say. In the debate over how to fix American public education, many believe that schools alone cannot overcome the impact that economic disadvantage has on a child, that life's outcomes are fixed by poverty and family circumstances, and that education doesn't work until other problems are solved. This theory is, in some ways, comforting for educators. I don't know any sick educator that should be comforted by that. It says, but the problem is the theory is wrong. It's hard to know how wrong because we haven't yet tried to make changes that would tell us. But plenty of evidence demonstrates that schools can make enormous difference despite the challenges presented by poverty and family background. So let me be clear about this, because I know it's very easy to get your words twisted. There is absolutely no evidence that poor children can't learn. Poverty is not a learning disability. In fact, there are people in this room here today, myself included, who came from poor families, who used education to improve their lives. I grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, in Tilden houses. I grew up in the part of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified, better known for producing boxers like Mike Tyson and rappers like Biggie Smalls. My parents sent all 6 of us to college, even though neither of them graduated from high school. Your superintendent right here comes from Buffalo, also from very humble origins. He's superintendent today. We know we can use education to break the cycle of poverty. But we also know that people like Sean and I are the exceptions, that there are millions of others who haven't been able to do it. And that should disturb all of us. Because once you see it's possible, then the question is, why are we doing more of it? Now, again, if I use the sports metaphor, we know how to get talent out of the housing products, don't we? If they can shoot the ball, right? If they're big and strong, we can recruit ball players from anywhere. There's a little place called Belle Glade. Belle Glade is right outside of Palm Beach. It is dirt poor. People don't even have running water. It's like going back in time when you go there. It's produced more professional football players than any community in America for the last 20 years. Some say it's because the grass is so high. You've got to run so fast to get through that grass. I say it's because we care about football. And coaches will go and make the sojourn into Belle Glade and tell that kid, we'll get you some shoes, we'll get you in a weight program, we will get you on the path to a Division I school. And the fact that you're poor is not an obstacle if you can play football. But I would say this, if we cared as much, we could get engineers from Belle Glade, and doctors, and optometrists, and teachers. Just a question of priorities, question of focus. And we have evidence that when we bring that kind of focus, we can, in fact, get better results. So let me go back to why did I say we made this too hard? I said we've made it too hard because we focus on the wrong things. We've been focused, for example, on how to close the achievement gap. Wrong question. I say what we should be focusing on is how do we use education to break the cycle of poverty? As soon as you do that, you start to realize, you know what kids need who are poor? They need economic opportunities like jobs. Right? They need social services because some of them don't have adequate housing. They don't have good health and nutrition. And they need an education that inspires them. We've been focused on raising achievement. Wrong focus. Because achievement is the outcome. You know what we should be focused on? How to get kids excited about learning. Wow, think about the difference. Suppose we told the teachers in Rochester, you know what your job is to do? Get the kids excited about learning. Get them motivated. Get them to read in the summer on their own time. You know what happened to achievement in Rochester if kids were reading books in the summer? My mother used to make us, on Saturdays, after our chores, go to the library as if that was a daycare center. And we'd go to the library, and Miss McDonald, the librarian, would be there to meet us. And she spent time with each one of us to find out what we were interested in, and then she'd recommend a book. And when I was 8 years old, she recommended to me A Wrinkle in Time. And I'd have never picked up that book. I didn't like the cover. And I didn't like science fiction. But I liked Miss McDonald. And so a week later, I was back, ready for more. You know what happens when you become an avid reader? You become an independently motivated learner who doesn't need to be told what to do. You're going to seek it out on your own. Why aren't we focused on that? So when I say we've made this too hard, I'd say again, it's because we focused on the wrong things. I was visiting a school in Syracuse, high school. It was such a dysfunctional place. I'm walking through the halls with the principal. She's embarrassed by the fact that you can't even tell if class is in session or not because their kids are all over the hallways. And there's a girl on the phone talking, and the principal says to her, you've got to put that away. And the girl says, shh, I'm on a call. And she's embarrassed to see the girl has no sense of respect for her. And I look outside the window, and I see a creek running across alongside the campus. So I turn to the principal and I say, what do you do with that creek? She said, what do we do with it? I said, yeah, is that part of the learning environment? She said, oh no, we're going to build a fence because it's a liability issue. It's a liability issue. What a way to think of a creek. You know, I could take you to a high school right now in the Bronx where kids are studying the Bronx River. And they take samples from the river in their chemistry class to study what pollutants are in the river. They're studying plant and animal life in the river. Why? Because they want them to know that science has a value that extends beyond the test, that can actually be used to help them understand that environment and contribute to a healthier community. How do you get kids motivated to want to learn things? It's not that hard. But we got to change some things. We got to get to the issue of relevance. And one of the ways you do it is by letting kids see how what they learn can be applied in the real world and lead to real jobs. I'm a big advocate of career and technical education. I helped to establish this program, the East Bay Biotech Academy. It involves 7 high schools, 5 biotech firms, 3 community colleges, and 1 four-year school. It's a pathway into a career. And it started because Bayer Laboratories, a German firm, and that's important because in Germany they use technical preparation for this purpose. They wanted to expand operations. And at the time I was the chief of staff to the mayor of Berkeley, and I heard about the negotiations. So I went right to the CEO. I said, why don't you invest and develop a career academy in biotech at our school? It was a continuation, an alternative school for the kids who've been pushed out of the other schools for behavior problems. And he said, well, this makes so much more sense than anything the city's asked for. Because we need trained employees. And an entry-level employee in 1988 in biotech was making $18 an hour. And so we commenced to build this biotech academy that is now 26 years old and a national model. A national model. Because when you show kids that there are pathways that lead to real opportunity, kids become more motivated. Because it becomes very concrete. Because here's a basic truth about kids. Kids who know they're going somewhere behave differently and make different decisions than kids who think they're going nowhere. My colleague Kristen Luker, studying teen pregnancy, she asked the question, why is it that middle-class girls are less likely to have babies as teenagers than poor girls? And she studies this and interviews girls all across the country. You know what she finds? Sex is not the issue. Though clearly sex is involved, isn't it? The big issue is what? If you think you're going to college, you think having a baby at 15 is not a good idea. If you're going nowhere and you had a mom who got pregnant as a teenager, you start to think that actually it makes sense to have a baby as a teenager. Why? Because teenagers have trouble contemplating the future, have trouble imagining what they're going to be like when they're 30 or 40 years old. That's a part of the brain's development. And so we have to look at models that are showing us how to break the cycle. And the best model in the country is not that far from here. It's the Harlem Children's Zone. And what I respect about Jeffrey Canada, who's no longer the CEO but still now chair of the board, is that he has created a learning organization. Now, they have a ton of money. And he's been great at recruiting money from Goldman Sachs and all the hedge funds. They love Jeffrey, and they fund it. So many people look and say, oh, it can't be replicated. But no, look at the model. Look at the model. They started focusing on infants. Because they said, you got to start early. And went all the way through 12th grade, and they didn't do things right, but they kept tweaking it. They got kids doing music. They got kids getting their teeth fixed. They got all kinds of services. And then they realized, you know what? Even when they get to college, they still need help. Because a lot of these kids can't afford to pay for their books, don't understand how college works, so now their program goes all the way through college. And it's serving 6,000 kids. Now, several years ago, just before President Obama was elected, I moderated a panel with Arne Duncan, who was not yet Secretary of Education, Carl Hayden, who was formerly the Chancellor of Schools in New York State, and Jeff Canada. And Jeff was describing the work of the Children's Zone, and I posed a question. I said, is there any evidence that the strategies that you're using will improve test scores and graduation rates? He says to me, I reject the question. I said, why do you reject the question? He said, because we never asked that question of middle-class kids. We fix their teeth, and we don't ask if that's going to raise their scores. We fix their teeth anyway. So I turned to Arne. I said, what do you think? And Arne said, I think he's going to need some evidence. Very telling answer, isn't it? Why evidence for one group but not for the other? Because the way we think about poor children is that they're not deserving. Right? And their families, unless right, they meet us at this standard. And so even when we see examples like Harlem Children's Zone, instead of thinking about how do we replicate it? How do we generate the social capital that exists in our communities? How do we use that to support our schools? Expecting our schools to do it by themselves. How do we engage communities and parents as partners in this work? Because you can't do it without the parents. Parents influence over 50% of student achievement. It's influenced by what parents do. Someone called us in today to ask you, why don't the inner city schools in Rochester just imitate what the suburban schools are doing? Say, okay, you know what that imitation would look like? Getting them a lot more money and their parents a lot more education, because what's driving outcomes for affluent kids is parental income and parental education. That's the strongest finding for over 60 years in American education. That's what predicts test scores. So if we have good research about what matters, then why don't we use it? If we were serious about improving schools, why wouldn't we do what they do in Toronto? Because if you want to find the urban district that's done more to address the needs of immigrant kids and poor kids and black kids and Hispanic kids and kids from different backgrounds, you got to go to Toronto. And all their data for the last 60 years has been all moving forward. Toronto, part of Ontario, Ontario is the highest performing province. Canada is number 2 in the world, according to the international comparisons. Toronto's a big system. For a big part of the time, the city was led by a crack-smoking mayor. Imagine if they had a sober mayor, what would have been possible? They've had strikes. So it's not like this is a perfect place. But they figured out how to do the work differently. You know what's different about Toronto? If a school is struggling, the Ministry of Education contacts and says, it seems like you need help. It seems like you need help in math. Because you know what they get in Toronto? If the kids are struggling in math, it means the teachers are struggling in teaching math. So maybe we need to send some people in who actually know how to teach math to work with you. It's called capacity building. That's the alternative to threats and pressure. So why don't we do what they do in Toronto? But we don't have to go to Toronto. Some people, oh, Canada's so far. Canada's a different country. They speak more than one language. We can't do that. So then let's look at places right in our own country. Go to Compton. Compton is so good at producing athletes, right? The Williams sisters, you know, so many professional football players and basketball come out of Compton, but guess what? They also have great school, a great school. System as a whole is in trouble, but that school, Laurel Street Elementary School, excellent. Why don't we learn from these examples? You know what these examples show us over and over again? Here's another school, El Monte, with a graduation rate that exceeds the state average for Hispanic kids, low-income immigrant kids. What do they do differently? They don't blame kids, that's for sure. And they don't blame their parents either. They are much more focused on how to make sure that there's a culture in place that's conducive to good teaching and learning. They're compensating for the effects of poverty. They're doing things, and we see it over and over again. This is Rosemead High School in El Monte, where again, if you look at where we're getting the results, you see different practices. And you know what it looks like when you visit those schools? It looks easy. It looks easy. It doesn't look that hard. Not like they're going crazy. It looks like, wow, teachers actually plan lessons together. Wow, why would you do that? Because the isolation of our teachers is the biggest obstacle to making sure that our best teachers are a resource for our weaker teachers. I can't tell, often I visit a school and I will find a teacher who's excellent right next door to someone who's struggling. And what we don't know how to do is to let the person who's good become a resource for the person who's not so good. Because we have a culture of false egalitarianism. We pretend we're all good. No, we're not all good, because teaching is hard. Teaching is complex. And our universities don't produce master teachers, do they? You know, UCLA has a great teacher ed program. We produce great novices. We don't produce master teachers. Where do master teachers come from? They come from practice. They come from schools. But many of our schools, they're working in isolation. We don't do that in medicine. We don't take our least experienced doctors and have them handle the most complex patients. We shouldn't do that, right? But in education, we do. We'll take brand new, inexperienced teachers. That's the Teach for America model. And then say, go work with those 16-year-olds who are still in the 8th grade, can't read. Let's see you do that. And you know, these kids come out with 22-year-olds. By the end of the year, they look like they're 55, right? Because they're stressed out. Because they were set up, and the kids were set up too. Right? And it doesn't make sense to do it this way. So we've got to start approaching it differently. You know, one of the things I always say is that we expect the kids to learn the way we teach. And if they can't do it, we blame them. You know what the schools that are getting better results are doing? They're teaching the way kids learn. Think about how kids learn things. Most kids don't learn this way, by downloading a lecture first, do they? They get a new video game, they get a lecture on it first? No, they go right into that game. They learn by doing. They learn through their mistakes. Mistakes are part of learning. And they learn through mastery. They get better and better. Why is that important? Because now they have a foundation on which to do more complex and more advanced work. We have kids entering high school performing at a 3rd and 4th grade level. And adults who act like they have nothing to do with it. That's the reason why the kind of accountability we need in our schools is internal accountability. My colleague Richard Elmore has been saying this for a long time. When we are accountable to each other, when we can have honest, candid conversations about what's going on in our classrooms, what's happening in our schools, schools start to change. And so it looks easy, but I'll agree, it's not easy. But getting kids to read books, how hard is that? Now, it's hard when they've been led to believe that the last thing they want to do is read a book. But when they're 7 and 8 years old, they want to read books. They want you to read books to them. If we nurture that love of learning that's already there in so many of our kids, guess what happens? It becomes so much easier because they become independently motivated. And the one who discovered that was not even a teacher. It was Maria Montessori, a physician. Maria Montessori realized that you could create an environment in a classroom where kids would want to learn things. If you ever been to a Montessori school, go to one that's done well. You always got to look at the one that's done well. And you will see kids who are independently motivated, kids who are self-disciplined. Remember, my son went to a Montessori school in Oakland. I came one day to pick him up. He's 3 years old, and he was in timeout. I said, what happened? He said, that girl put me in timeout. And I'm looking and I said, you're still here, right? And they said, yes, we teach the kids they actually have the ability to discipline each other. Because you know what they get at those schools? That the values are more important than the rules. Think about that. If you don't teach kids to be honest, if you don't teach kids to be kind, if you don't teach kids to be respectful, but you have lots of rules about all the things, the punishments you can get, as soon as the rules can't be enforced, what happens? And so, I don't want to pretend it's easy, but if we got boys reading, I know that there's an initiative here in Rochester to address the needs of African American Latino boys. Is literacy a part of it? If not, we got a problem. Because there's no job in America, no good paying job you can hold if you can't read and write well. And if you don't have the ability to speak well. And so we need to make sure we focus on the right things. And we need to make sure that we never lower the standards in the name of equity. Equity is not about lowering the standards. Equity's always got to be about meeting the needs, understanding the needs, but always focusing on the outcomes. This quote should disturb all of us. This is from a student at a school in California. He says, we were going to be taking the same exact AP exam as the students we met from the other school. We needed to know the same things, but while they were starting to read the Odyssey, we were reading Hunger Games. He said, I know there's nothing wrong with the Hunger Games. I love the Hunger Games. I read it when I was 12. It just that it struck me as unfair. Unfair. Because we didn't hold that child to the same standards and challenge that child to think deeply because we expected so little. And so, again, if we look at the places that are getting it right, we will see it's not as hard as we've made it out to be. Visiting a school in Oakland, California, where they're using debate to develop literacy skills in kids. How many of you know kids that like to argue? I know a lot of them, right? Well, guess what? Some of those kids can also learn how to do research to support their arguments, how to be persuasive, how to listen so they know how to rebut arguments. And they're finding debate is a great way to develop literacy and a great way to develop the full range of skills our kids need to learn. And so when we find schools like this, we've got to learn from them. And it doesn't mean that it's like a cookie cutter recipe that you just apply it here and voila, you too will have great schools. Because it's more complex than that. But the essential ingredients are what we have to extract and understand if we're going to see success go to scale. So this school I visited, PS12. PS12 was in Bedford-Stuyvesant, not far from where I grew up in Brownsville. And I was contacted by Sadie Silva, the principal who's featured in this article from the Daily News, because her school got the award for the highest gains in literacy and math. She said, Pedro, please come visit my school, come visit my school. So I was curious, I went to visit. And the first person she introduced me to is her secretary. She said, I want you to meet the person who does all the administrative work. I said, well then, what do you do as principal? She said, I'm the lead teacher. I didn't become a principal to escape the classroom. She said, come on, let's go visit the classrooms. And we go in classrooms, and in every room I go to, there are 4 and 5 adults. I said, where do you get all these teachers? She said, they're not all teachers. We have special ed teachers in the classroom because almost 25% of our kids have IEPs. They have special ed students, so they do have more teachers. She said, but the other adults are parents we've trained to work with teachers. And they are the extra hands in the room. They are getting the copies done. They are working right side by side to assist the teacher. And I see one parent, she's standing right next to a little boy. I said, why is she so close to that boy? She said, well, he has trouble settling down. And we're glad she's here because he's a handful. 30% of our kids are homeless. 30%. So imagine what that means. Typically that means that there are going to be kids who will be highly transient. They'll be coming in and out of school because they're moving all the time. They can't stay in the shelter long enough. Not at this school, but 90% of the kids who start in the fall will be there by the end of the year. Because when parents know they're getting a good thing, they'll take an extra bus to get there, to stay involved in that school. School has partnerships with a hospital that provides health services on site, has a partnership with the YMCA that provides extended learning opportunities. So the school is open until 6 o'clock every night. And kids get art and music and chess and swimming lessons. And she's got a partnership with a job training agency that provides GED classes for parents and job training for parents. She believes that if the parents are educated and employed, they'll be able to do a better job with their children. She says, I want you to meet my guidance counselor. I got him from the Rubber Room. So you all must have heard about the Rubber Room by now. Right? It's that place where they send teachers who've been written up, and you could be there sometimes for years, collecting salary, doing crossword puzzles. I said, how do you know to get this man to the Rubber Room? He said, well, I don't know why he was there in the first place, but he had been my counselor when I was a student, and he saved my life. And so when I heard he was there, I asked for him, and he said you could have him. So I go to there, meet the counselor, and he's there with the little boy, and I introduced myself to both, and I asked the little boy, why are you here today? He says, I'm here to learn how to be good. I said, well, is it working? He said, I hope so. He said, I'm tired of being sent out of class. And then they explained the school has a no suspension policy because they don't believe that sending kids home to watch television is an effective form of discipline. They actually do focus on getting kids to be responsible for their behavior. She takes me to a session, professional development for teachers, run by 2 social workers on how to respond to the social and emotional needs of kids. And teachers are posing questions. How do I deal with kids who are aggressive? How do I deal with kids who are depressed or kids with anxiety disorders? One teacher said, I have a child with attachment issues. He's attached to my leg and I can't teach. And in each case, the social workers give practical suggestions of what they can do. They will come to your class, we'll watch, see if it works. And I asked Sadie, why did you decide to offer this as a form of professional development? She said, well, until I did, my teachers were referring too many kids to special ed. She said, my teachers have to be more skilled to work in a school like this. And this is part of their development as professionals. Now, when I left the school, I wrote to the chancellor, who at the time was Joel Klein. I said, this is an amazing school. You need to visit if you haven't. 2 days later, he went. And he was so impressed, he wrote about it in a memo he sent out to every principal in New York City. That's over 1,800 principals. except the only thing he mentioned about his visit was the data system she was using to monitor the students. Because New York City just spent $100 million on a data system. And I wrote back to him, I said, Joel, I'm so glad you visited, but you missed it. Because it's not just the data system that makes a school like that successful. And that is the bigger political problem. That a lot of times the people who are in leadership roles, they don't understand what it takes to make a school like East High successful. It doesn't take pressure or gimmicks. It's hard work. Hard work like I saw going on in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. Talk about poverty. They would make Rochester look wealthy. Because not only do they have high rates of unemployment, they have high numbers of people with HIV and large numbers of kids who are orphans. Parents have died. 40% of the kids at this school, Sapphire Roads Elementary School, were orphans. And the principal, who's in the back with that camera, Bruce Damon, invited me to visit his school. And then he tells me, I work for them. I work for these parents. He said when he was sent there by the Ministry of Education, the school was in shambles. It's falling apart. So he decided the way he was going to turn the school around was to start by throwing a Thanksgiving party for the community. And he had food and music, and people came. And they said, well, why are you thanking us? He said, I'm thanking you in advance for the help you're going to give me. And then he proceeded to build a partnership with parents. He's got over 80 parents a day who do everything from work with teachers to staff a nursing station. I said, are they trained? He said, no. Half the time all they can do is give a kid a glass of water and tell them to lay down. He said, most of the time it works. If it doesn't, we have to call in a real nurse. They have a garden that produces food because they had land and no food in the cafeteria. They didn't wait for the ministry to help them because no help was coming. They took it on themselves. And over again, that's the message that I see from the schools where I see the difference being made. It's not because the leadership in the state, I wish we had it, and maybe one day we will. It's because the leadership on the ground in the community, locally, they're not waiting, they're resourceful. They're going out and getting the help that our schools need, getting the help the kids need. They're focused on the right questions. They're focused on how to use research to drive practice. I'll talk about this more tomorrow with the teachers here. And because they are, they're proving that the problem is not the kids. Let me say that again. The problem is not the kids. The problem is our inability to create the conditions that would allow our kids to thrive. That's the problem. And if we focus on how to create those conditions, our kids will thrive. Let me close with this. Because this holistic vision that I've been speaking about tonight is, I say, in place in many places. I saw it in the South Bronx a few years ago at PS 138. We have great names for our schools in New York City, don't we? Public School 138 on Willis Avenue. It was in the part of the Bronx that burned in the 1970s. It used to look like a war zone. My grandmother lived there in Willis Avenue projects for years, so I knew the neighborhood well. So when I heard that 138 was a high-performing, high-poverty school, I said, I gotta see this. So I arranged a visit. I'm greeted by a little girl. She's about 8 years old. She said, I'm your tour guide. I said, okay, let's go. First thing she shows me is the proof, the articles, the awards the schools received for their accomplishments. Then she takes me to the library, and you see that the kids are reading books. There's an ongoing competition for which class reads the most books. I said, what do you get? I said, pizza. That's all it takes? Yeah, just pizza. And I'm so impressed because the kids are producing newsletters and poetry, and there are all kinds of evidence that the kids are learning, that you see on the walls. You see it celebrated in the school. So I tell the girl, I'm so impressed. She said, well, you haven't seen anything yet. I got to take you upstairs. We go upstairs, and that's when I learned that the only museum in New York City dedicated to the history of the Bronx is in their school. But it's not locked away in a classroom. It's in the hallways. So you can actually see it. You can see the memorabilia. You can see the picture of the Bronx family, a German family, spelled their name with a K, not an X, owned a large farm. There's a picture of the Yankees from the 1920s, a picture of Joe Louis when he fought Max Schmeling. There's the first album by Donald Byrd, because he came from that neighborhood in Glass. and all kinds of antiques and memorabilia, and the first thing that comes to my mind is that this could easily be vandalized, it could be stolen. So I turned to the girl and I asked, aren't you worried that some of this could be taken? It looks like very valuable stuff. And she says to me, I don't know about the schools you go to normally, but at this school, kids take care of things. Why do I even ask the question? Because I am used to going to schools where kids are being treated like inmates in a prison, where they're being marched through the hallways in silence. I had this conversation with John King when I visited his school. John King, our former commissioner, former secretary of education. I visited the charter school he ran in Boston, Roxbury Prep. I saw great teaching, but I saw kids in silence in the hallway, silence in the cafeteria. I said, John, I've never seen this at an independent private school. He said, well, it works for us here. I said, well, then my question to you is, are you teaching these kids to be leaders or followers? Because leaders get to talk in the hallway. What's your vision for the children of Rochester? You don't have a football team, right? So you can love your schools and your kids. And so I encourage you, don't just stop with this high school. Right? This whole community needs to have schools it can be proud of. Our schools will determine the future of our cities, the future of our country. It's that important. And so I encourage all of you, whether you have kids or not, stay involved. The real estate agents will tell you your property values are affected by the quality of your schools. So even if you don't care about the kids, you just care about your property, then you need to be involved. Because we have a lot at stake in creating schools that we can be proud of and that our children deserve. Thank you.
Walking up took away my ability to join in applause, Pedro, but I want you to know first of all, you need to know I'm a preacher in the black church tradition. So I have been a fan of yours for a long time, and I have read, I've followed radio or podcasts and seen videos, but I am delighted to be able to say that in person I was saying amen and say it, bruh, just as loudly as when I'm at home or in the car listening. Thank you all for being here. My name is Wade Norwood. I am a member of the New York State Board of Regents and delighted, well, I guess I wouldn't be honest, I am punished to be your moderator this evening because I was at a meeting of the Center for Urban Education Studies at Warner's Advisory Board. Delighted to serve there with our dear friend Sandy Parker. And I talked to Steve about this program and said how excited I was. And I think Steve knew he needed to make sure I would be contained. So he put me in the role of the moderator and facilitator this evening so that I have to be brief and I have to not talk a lot. And that is good news for you all. What I would say to you, Pedro, is that my role, I'm going to introduce panelists who are dear friends of mine from the community who will come forward. And panelists, as I call your name, feel free to come up, take a seat, and they will act as respondents to your presentation. And folks, they'll talk for about 5 minutes apiece. And after they're done, then we will start taking questions from you. You all have cards, I know, and a ballpoint pen if you didn't have one walking in, because a student handed one to me. And feel free to send up questions or comments that you'd like to have Pedro or the panelists respond, and I will play the role of fielding them. But I want to just take a moment, Pedro. One of the games I've played in my 35 years of public life is I've always said to my wife, we can choose an event, we can determine the field by who we meet when we walk in. And the first 3 people I met walking in, one was Brian Hickman, who is a philanthropist who is committed to innovation in this community and committed to making sure that every child should have the opportunity to be taught by an effective teacher in a caring and effective school climate. The second person I met walking in was Marilyn Patterson Grant, who not only is a philanthropist today, but came to her position after a career as an educator at the building and at the district level. And Marilyn joined me in doing that most difficult of all jobs, I believe, has to be done in America, which is raising an African American child. And then the third person I met as I walked in was Mary Ellen Burris of Wegmans, which has a long and strong tradition in this community of not only committing itself to children, but joining with the University of Rochester in forcing this community to do what you have suggested is the imperative, which is to ask the right question. And to ask the right question in a way that leads to linking improving school outcomes with addressing the real problem, which is this segregated poverty that exists in this country. So I want you to know, those three people really send the message to me that you've got the right audience in the room to hear your message and to act on it, so that when we are done here this evening, this will not just be our opportunity to announce that we had a great assembly and a good time was had by all, but rather people who will tomorrow take our conversation and act on it to create change on behalf of our children. So thank you all for being here. And with those words, and with the great pride and pleasure of being a university alumnus, I would like to invite to come forward our panelists. First of all, T. Andrew Brown, my colleague on the New York State Board of Regents and our Honorable Vice Chancellor of the Board. Gloribel Arvelo Park, who is a social studies lead teacher here at East High School. She has been referenced before, but allowed me to introduce Joanne Larson, who is a professor at the Warner School of Education, University of Rochester. Natasha Green, who is the most important member of this panel because she is a parent of a student here at East High School. And my dear friend, the fellow who handed me this wonderful privilege and honor, Steve Eubing, who is the director of the Center for Urban Educational Success at the University of Rochester. Our panelists, my friends. Andrew, we will ask you to start off. I'll play the role of timer if I need to be the heavy, but asking each of you all to take about 5 minutes introducing yourselves and responding to what we have heard from Professor Nogueras.
Is my mic on? All right. Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank East High School and the University of Rochester for hosting this event tonight. Dr. Noguera, I especially want to thank you for coming to our fine city today and sharing your comments. You've certainly inspired us. You've given us a lot to think about. And I know that you are friends with a number of my colleagues on the Board of Regents, so I will be sure to bring your comments back to them. I know we only have a few minutes to talk about some of the things that you talked about, which is hard to do. You raised a lot of important issues. I think that the important thing is, when I look out in this audience, I see so many committed people. And when I convene with my colleagues in Albany on the Board of Regents, we talk about what's going on around the state, including here in Rochester. And unfortunately, our numbers are not where they should be in Rochester, where we'd like them to be. But I'm continually inspired by the commitment here. So even though our numbers are not here, I know that folks have not given up. And that is the case in some places, but not here. And I look out in this audience, I see a diverse, immensely talented audience, and I'm inspired by that. So thank you all for coming. The importance of education, I think we would all agree, is more vital today than it's ever been. It wasn't that long ago that we could find people who did well without an education, without the ability to read all that well or write all that well. Dr. Noguera, you said today you can't do that. But not that long ago you could. Things aren't going to change. Things aren't going back. So now education has more importance and value than it ever has. And it has, in order to to be a system of education that we can all be proud of, there has to be equity within it. Dr. Noguera, you spoke about the importance of equity. And when we're really talking about equity, we're talking about inequity. We're talking about what people don't have. We're not talking about equity, which is a fairness. We're talking about those who are on the short end, largely people of color, English language learners. We're talking about those who are struggling. We're talking about those perhaps who are disabled. We're talking about people who fall into those categories that really have been shortchanged by the system. We can all acknowledge that, and we have to do something about it. And when we think about equity, we're really talking about opportunity. You cannot succeed in life today without a solid education. If you are not being provided what others are being provided while you're in school, then you are not going to be able to compete and take on life's challenges like others are that have been given more opportunities. And we know that some schools have been able to provide more than others. Dr. Noguera, you mentioned AP classes in one of your examples. We know that here in New York State, many schools don't have AP courses at all. I mean, that's a tragedy. Well, we know that we can see that other schools have many AP courses across the board. So we have to do something about that. On the Board of Regents, we're talking about equity in everything. As the Vice Chancellor, I meet with the Chancellor on a regular basis, and we put together the agenda that we use to hold our meetings in Albany each month. And anything that comes to the board has to pass the equity test. We do not pass any regulations any longer that do not pass the equity test. And that really is just about fairness. And you can't argue with that. It's fairness. We keep it simple. If it's something that cannot be made available to all students, we don't want it at all. With respect to the gaps that we see, there are opportunity gaps and there are achievement gaps. And often the opportunity gaps are what lead to the achievement gaps. So clearly we have to address that. And I see Regent Norwood giving me the 2-minute sign. So I will pick it up. And hopefully we'll get to address some of these issues later. One thing that I will point out is the significance of poverty and segregation. Often where you see most poverty in New York State, you see most segregation. And that's unfortunate. Here in New York, we are the most segregated school system in the United States. That seems shocking to many people. When I say that in audiences, I see them look at me like, are you sure? I am sure. We have to do something about that. Brown v. Board of Education told us that you can't have separate and equal. It is not equal if it's separate. Here we have separate schools. We have poverty playing a significant role. We have more segregation in Rochester than we have in most districts around the state, and we have to do something about it. I challenge the New York State Legislature to find ways to address that. Unfortunately, in the Board of Regents, we can only do so much to force that issue. It's going to take more. It's going to take the legislature, Board of Regents, and the governor if we really want to do something about segregation here. One last thing that I'll say is we often talk about issues of standards and assessments and curriculum. Those are things that take place between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. because we own that space. But the real battleground for many of the kids who are most vulnerable is after that. It's from 3 p.m. to 8 a.m. We don't own that, so we don't talk about it a lot, but we have to. We have to find ways to address those concerns and the problems that these kids are having once they go home at night, because they bring it all back to school. And sometimes coming to school is the only piece that they have. So we have to find ways of doing that. On the Board of Regents at the state level, we're getting behind community schools, My Brother's Keeper, which allows us to begin to make strides and inroads toward addressing those problems that kids are facing in the most vulnerable groups outside of the school day. And just one last thing, Dr. Noguera, you mentioned in so many words the importance of education to all of us. We have to keep in mind that education is not simply about kids sitting in classroom. It's about all of us. We all have to be invested in the educational process. And the more that we can get around that, the better off we will be. We see that it impacts, if we don't have successful schools, we see that we don't have a successful workforce, the economy pays a price. We can talk about health issues, we can talk about the criminal justice system, we can talk about having to pay for things that we would like to not have to pay for as a society. So clearly the case can be made that this is something that is important to all of us and should be important to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Ms. Alvarado?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Buenas noches a todos. Y Dr. Noguera, it's an honor to be part of this panel here with you. It is enlightening, your work is enlightening, and it's an inspiration, and it's sobering. It touches home. I am a Latina. I have been a teacher in Rochester for 27 years. One of the poorest cities in the nation. I still consider myself an L student, English language learner, who still struggles with what you called cultural capital. Still trying to gain that. I wear 3 hats at East. I'm a teacher, teacher leader, teacher of social studies, and a bilingual teacher, bilingual advocate. My points of my reflection reflect these 3 roles. Your research and that of others speak of the fact that all teachers need to become literacy teachers, that we need to design lessons that are fun, more inquiry-based, student-centered, lessons where students explore, question, investigate, find answers. Lessons where students collaborate, where teachers tap into background knowledge. Lessons that are culturally relevant, where teachers bring in the best in students. These are the practices I have embraced, I believe in, and work hard to implement every day here at East. These are the practices that the EPO is promoting at East. These are the practices that my fellow instructional coaches help implement and support. I feel encouraged hearing that so many places across the nation in our own state have used many of these strategies you mentioned and are successful. As a social studies teacher and coach, I do struggle with implementing all these strategies and dealing with the reality. How to do it all. How to teach literacy and history at the same time. How to teach huge amounts of content in global history and give students time to explore the material in depth. What do I cut out? What do I teach? It's all going to be on the Regents exam. How to design lessons that are inquiry-based and student-centered, and still prepare them for that Regents exam. That includes 10,000 years of history, and many parts of the exam mirror the AP exam that students take for world history. How do we help students at East who come with a 3rd and 4th grade level, a reading level? 21% are English language learners and might have never become literate in their own language. 16% come with disabilities, and they all have to take the same Regents exam. Some of them take it 4, 5 times before they are successful or drop out. All of these children come with similar backgrounds of the poverty, one of the poorest cities in the nation. My question is, how do we deal with all of this? How do we sustain it? Here's an example. Some days I have 50% of my bilingual students show up. All of them have to take these exams. I try to make the lesson student-centered. I do try to tap into the knowledge. I do try to make them fun as much as I can. But many of them can't come. They have to babysit for mom, who has to go to work. They have to stay behind. They're 16. Mom has to go back to Puerto Rico. Grandma's sick. They have to find a job. to help support the family. These are my challenges. These are the challenges of my colleagues. Despite all of this, I'm all in. All in all the time. Yeah. Thank you. And my husband knows, he can attest to this. I come ready every day to do whatever it takes. We signed up for this. We signed up to take on more. But it's daunting. So we welcome any advice, any help you can give us, especially tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you for being all in. Greatly appreciate it. Joey?
So I want to thank Dr. Noguera for coming today and for ruining all the things I was going to say with your talk. I wanted to throw everything out. But that I would follow Mr. Norwood's path and go way afar. So I'm going to focus on what I did think about talking about. We all play different roles on this panel. The role I'm going to pick today is as a researcher and university faculty member. I am a city resident, and my kids did go to city schools, including my youngest graduated from this school. But I'm not going to go into that story. I have a couple of points I want to make that I hope generate some thoughts. So one of the things Dr. Noguera pointed out is that we need student-centered curriculum. I agree. The shift from teacher-centered to student-centered was an important shift and a necessary shift, but I would like to argue that it's not a sufficient shift to make the kinds of transformation in context for learning that we need, that will generate the kind of excitement about learning that you talked about. We know from learning theory, and I echo your frustration that in educational research, we know a lot of things that are supposed to happen and they don't, and I blame us for that. Not to play the blame game, but I think that universities, as my colleague George Moses, I don't know if he's here, have been sleeping, and we need to wake up. But anyway, we know from learning theory that we need to move to a learning-centered focus, and by doing that, you focus on learning as a human endeavor. And everybody then in the process of knowledge production is a learner. Teachers and students are learners. It follows for inquiry-based that the inquiry then is a problem or an issue that not everybody knows the answer to already. So it's not just memorizing 10,000 years of global history in a semester for a test. It's perhaps taking a local problem and having the school become a resource for the community for local problem solving. One wonderful example here at East is Mr. Newman's Vision Care program, where a problem of Rochester City School District children not having access to eyewear is solved or is being addressed by a program that the school does, where the students produce eyeglasses, hundreds of them, for free for area students. Things like lead poisoning, or you mentioned the Bronx School studying the river. We could do the research. A scholar named Bingham talks about knowledge-producing schools, where the school can become, rather than a place you send kids, a place that produces things that the community can benefit from. The move to community schools and other things can help with that, but I think that kids can do original research that can solve real problems rather than memorizing facts we already know. Secondly, a lot of people talk about, and you actually didn't mention it in this talk, but there was something in a reading I did where people often use the term empowerment, which I bristle at because everybody has power. We don't have to give people power. Our students have power. Ask anybody who works in this building, or when you said kids know how to argue, yes, they do. And what we need to do is remove the oppressive conditions that block people from using their power in positive ways. In schools, traditional punitive disciplinary practices oppress students. They don't lose power, they shift it. It comes out in negative ways that in turn builds more restrictive discipline, so it's a cycle, it's that pipeline, it's the prison, mimicking a prison. When we remove the oppression, which is something we started to do here at East, power shifts again so that all participants can, in an endeavor, count. The kids count, the administrators count, the parents count, the teachers count. When this first happens, as I thought happened at East, there may be an uptick in negative expressions of power. We had a lot of kids saying, all right, well, you're not going to spend me? Okay, watch this, right? Not terrible, but there was some interesting challenges. What I would say that we can't just sort of give access without scaffolding is my larger point, so that the scaffolding or help that students need would include what Dr. Noguera has referred to as the social and cultural capital. They had the slide up, and in some of his other work, what he refers to as the codes of power. So an example, I think, of that is our implementation of restorative practice, which has been a learning experience for all of us. I asked Dr. Nelms for permission to steal this story. We just as an example of some of the students learning to use restorative practice and learning to, as you talked about, the values and respecting each other. How many? 2? 1? I'm almost done. A young man was struggling with some negative interactions with peers over the weekend, and he emailed I don't know if it was the principal or somebody, an administrator, and said, Miss, I need one of those circle things. This is happening, and I don't want to have a fight, so I need one of those circle things, which I thought was fabulous. And the administrators responded, and they met them, and they had one of those circle things, and there wasn't any violent reaction. Somebody can correct the story if I'm getting it wrong. But the idea is that it wasn't a matter of just saying, okay, we're not going to punish you. There's a process of teaching about caring for one another and respecting each other and learning how to talk to each other and learning how to listen to each other. Our students have been systematically denied access to the kind of social and cultural capital and the practices that you've been referring to. And any reform that seeks equity and excellence must not simply give access to them, but also scaffold the learning and use of them. To end, I'll say that when I talk about East with people, someone always says, after they say it's the parents' fault, or the teacher's fault, or the blame, they'll always say, well, you can't fix schools as long as society's a mess. And I agree that schools and society work together, but that argument stops anybody from doing anything. And I, for one, and I think everybody here at East, no longer support that argument, that we have to start somewhere. And at East, I think we've started, and Dr. Noguera noted there are other places that have also started, but we have a lot of work to do. We're showing some promise. We do have the rest of the city that we need to think about. We need to move past having pockets or schools to what I would argue we need a movement. We need to move beyond the idea of scaling up to a movement toward equity and excellence so that all children and youth are educated as whole humans in equitable and excellent schools. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Noguera, for taking your time, your energy, and professional expertise to address the critical concerns of education in the urban communities. I am a single parent of 3 and currently have 2 children right here attending East Lower and 1 child attending another school in the district. Although I have many concerns across the board, and I know I don't represent every parent in the community, but I certainly will try. My main concern is the gap between parents and educators. I personally believe in hands-on parenting. I work odd hours. I'm due tonight at 10 o'clock. But I still find it to be difficult navigating through the system, being their advocate. You know, as an example, I raised 3 stellar students through an elementary school where they attended, academically excelled, and the principal doesn't even acknowledge you when you walk in the building. 2 of them happen to be Eastman Scholars for musical talent, and you attend the performance and you don't even get a greeting at the door. A 5th grade teacher sends home weekly reports, and she is a teacher with a population mostly young black males. 5th grade, we all know 5th graders, what the hormone level is at that age. And she's sending home little tidbits. We have a meeting about it. And she tells me that, you know, my child is distracted by other students. And I ask, okay, what is the seating arrangement? Because my child then tells me he's being distracted and he can't focus on the teacher while other students are distracting him. So we have a meeting about it. We come to an agreement, but then I get a report card that says my child can't focus. And I have an issue with that. How do we, Dr. Noguera, support teachers to be culturally diverse? Most teachers don't even live in the city or ever have. How do we support parents? You know, I tend to have a strong hold on my 3, but what about those children who are the parent? And the parent struggles with simple discipline. How do we support those parents? Bridging that gap between parents and educators is what I would like to see happen. You know, coming from East High School, alumnus, I took it very personally when it was in jeopardy of being shut down. I want to thank University of Rochester for coming in, stepping in, and saving one of the first high schools in the city. I have 2 boys here right now, and I came from elementary, not even knowing the principal on a personal level, to now having a direct phone line to where I can call Ms. Wilson anytime, any place. And before I chose this school, I didn't know where to begin to send them, because it was just the most difficult choice I had to make. If it wasn't for the Warner School's Horizon Enrichment Program that my kids have attended for the summer since kindergarten, Ms. Lynn Gatto, Director of Education at the U of R, she says, send them to East. I was sold right there. Ms. Joanne mentioned the optics program. My 2 boys right now are wearing glasses made by the high school students, and you would have thought I went to LensCrafter. I just would like to see a change in that gap. I shouldn't have to move to the suburb to get stellar academic support for my children. Thank you.
And then I yield the floor back to
never to be the one who has to follow the parent, because that's always hard. This is my third year I've been involved with this project, and a lot of it has been about changing preconceived notions. Preconceived notion one, you can't go into a high school and make changes. You have to start with kids preschool. And if we had accepted that paradigm, we wouldn't be here. Preconceived notion number two, that you really can't make changes because there's so many issues with the union, there's so many issues with the state, and the obstacles are beyond what anybody or any organization can change. We've had really an inspiring relationship with our teachers union or other unions. We have a contract with our unions that I would put against any in terms of the instructional integrity of the collective negotiations agreement, and we did that together with our teachers. You said earlier, Pedro, imagining teachers planning together. Our teachers plan together every single day, and that's they have PD every summer. They have PD occurring ongoing throughout the year. We have amazing teachers in this building. We had to change a paradigm of how kids are expected to be treated, and then how they're actually treated. A change of paradigm from one that's fairly punitive to one that's restorative. You know, we've seen 80% or so less suspensions and less fights, and it's not perfect. Kids come to us with lots of things on their mind, lots of things they need to work out, and that's why every single day our kids are in a family group situation where they get to talk about that stuff with teachers who do that as part of their job. See, our teachers are here all day long, all in, all the time for kids. We have a long way to go, but I'm completely optimistic that we're going to be able to together create much, much better lives for the kids in our school. And some of the things we've done, interestingly, that have had the biggest impact have been things that one would never have expected to change kids. We're the only school in the Rochester City School District to have driver's education. And attendance in driver's education is almost 100%. The kids show up every day. And if they're not in school, if they're out for other classes, they can't take driver's ed. And the passing rate in driver's ed is almost 100%. And guess what? Kids need to learn how to drive safely, especially in urban areas. It's one small example of, by the way, how did we know to bring driver's education into the program? We asked the kids, what is it you want most from the school? They said two things. The first, we haven't delivered on. Better school lunches. We have failed miserably, but we haven't given up. But the second was driver education, and that wasn't hard to deliver on. And the kids value that. And our teachers growing every single day in their own instructional efficacy and their understanding of what kind of accommodations they have to make to create the kinds of experiences for kids that will really matter in their lives. We have a long way to go. But we did a few things right. We brought in the best leadership we could find. We brought in the best teaching staff we could find. Every teacher who is on staff here applied to be here and understood what the EPO was before they came in, and have worked incredibly hard to get us to a level where we're starting to see some real improvements. But there's another paradigm that needs to change. Put my slide up. The other paradigm is that we're supposed to do this for the same price that we do in the suburbs. I listened to the WXXI thing today, and a gentleman called in and said, we ought to be doing what the suburbs do. You know, what they're doing, this is exactly the three districts he mentioned, but they're doing in places like Pittsford, Brighton, and Canandaigua. Well, guess what? I was the superintendent in Canandaigua for 18 years, and that's where Laura Bell's kids went to school. And if we did the same thing that we did in Canandaigua, we wouldn't have a snowball's chance, and we couldn't possibly get anything done because the needs are so much different in this environment than they are in the suburbs. You know, just for example, every one of our kids, grades 6, 7, 8, and 9, gets a double period of math and a double period of ELA. That's approximately twice as many math and ELA teachers that you have to provide to do that than you would in Canandaigua, which is a lovely suburb just about 35 miles away from here. If you look over here, I looked at my last budget I did when I was superintendent in Canandaigua, which is 2006. But we had about the same population, 712, that East does. So at East, we had to fund 11 security personnel. We didn't have any security officers in Canandaigua when I was there. So that's 11 different, we had 8 counselors and no social workers in Canandaigua, 11 counselors and 7 social workers, and they are working all day long, every single minute, and are absolutely critical to developing and supporting the social emotional health of our kids, okay? We didn't have an SRO when I was there. They have one now, actually. School resource officer, that's a police officer. We had no ESL teachers in Canandaigua. I think there's one now. We have 17.3 teachers for kids for whom English is a new language. And they do extraordinary work. We had no bilingual teachers in Canandaigua. I don't know how many bilingual teachers we had, Barbara. Here. We have a whole, so these aren't extra things that we're providing here, but they're expensive. We have 2 attendance workers. We had 12% of our kids in Canandaigua who were students with disability. Here's 24%. This is the year we started, actually. It changes every year. Typically 95% attendance. We rarely made 80% attendance before we were here. By the way, we typically make over 90% grades 7, 8, and 9 every year. And we had 3 reading teachers on staff in Canandaigua. There were none here when we got here. 21% free and reduced lunch. When I was in Canandaigua, that's changed. But 90% free and reduced lunch here. So if you think you can support kids and provide them with what they need and be successful, for doing basically the same thing as what they're doing in those 3 suburban districts that they mentioned on the radio today, that's a pipe dream. Those are the paradigms that we need to break. And you're right. If we can spend this much money on a losing football team, we can spend this much money on developing the programs we need for all kids, including urban kids.
Pedro, I was being told that by having the mics at the table that there's not a good enough pickup, so you may need to put it in your hand as well. I would just ask with our remaining time, Andrew talked about education's link into breaking the cycle of poverty. Glorabelle talked about the fact that there are real-life challenges that poverty brings into schools. Joanne's comment of schools have to be a resource for addressing those challenges. Natasha's comment of the gap that exists between educators and the students and their families, and Steve then following up on that means the need for a new paradigm because we ain't in Kansas anymore, Toto. Are there any of those points to which you would care to respond or address?
Yeah, let's go back up for a second. Because I closed with this chart, but I didn't really describe it in detail. When I started by talking about a more holistic framework for addressing the needs of kids. At the center of the framework is always teaching and learning. We never can lose sight. That's what the mission of education is about. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we have the conditions that are right for teaching and learning? Right? And work on creating those conditions, giving teachers clear guidance on what good teaching looks like. There are a lot of teachers out there who have been teaching for a long time, but they don't really know how to impact students. And especially at a high school, you see a lot of teachers who confuse teaching with talking. Teaching is not about covering the material. We're constantly have to be looking for evidence of learning. And when you teach with a focus on evidence of learning, you teach differently. We'll come back to that tomorrow. But beyond that, then we have to think about health and nutrition. You mentioned food, lunch. What's the #1 health challenge amongst kids in the inner city? Obesity and asthma. Right? If you're not giving kids healthy lunches, you're actually contributing to absenteeism and all kinds of issues later on. Family engagement. Natasha, you spoke about it. What's the big difference between the schools in the suburbs and schools here? In the suburbs, the schools are accountable to the parents they serve. Just ask them. They'll tell you, we work for the parents. Because the parents let them know, you work for us. Right? Not the board, for us. If we don't like what happens, we'll get to do something about it. When you go to the inner city, you ask the educators, who do you work for? They say, we work for the board, we work for the district. They don't talk about the parents, and it shows. That's what you have to change. You have to change. When I talk about a partnership with parents, partnerships are rooted in trust. Trust has to be earned, right? And we have to actually treat the kids as the way we'd want our kids treated. Right? So we have to recognize that building the partnership with parents is a vital part of moving the school forward, because you can't do it without them. Community partnerships, because you can have other needs. You know, we've got to have the health needs addressed. You know, you're dealing with, I was talking to the board member about crime. Crime is going to impact attendance. We have kids who are afraid of coming to and from school every day. That's an issue, right, that we have to make sure. So we have to be working with community agencies and the police department to make sure there's safe passage for our children. So safety, mentorship, all these things are got to be part of our way we think about the work. So I would say that we have to make sure the lens that we're using to guide our work is broad enough to really get the results. It's easier to do the work in the suburbs, and I think you made that point very clearly. And the reason why is because the parents are doing most of it. They have the resources. They're investing in their kids. Ask what are affluent kids doing this summer? Right? They're going to be traveling. They're going to be in camps. What are kids in Rochester going to be doing this summer? Right? That lost time in learning impacts outcomes later on. So all you have to do, if we compare the investment we're making in the children in our affluent communities to the investment we're making in our inner city, we'll see it's a huge gap. And that's where those gaps in opportunity get perpetuated and continue to reinforce these gaps in outcomes later on.
Question from the audience, Pedro. What practical applications do you suggest for high school administrators and teachers to keep students motivated in attending school?
So much of that is about culture, the culture of the school. About, you mentioned, you know, how does the principal treat you when you come to the school? Does the principal know the kids? Do the teachers see the principal as a source of support? You know, the job of the principal is very difficult and very complex. And, you know, because you've got to be the connector, and you've got to be the person that has the vision of where the school's going, and you're using that vision to keep everybody on the same page. So, you know, I've never seen a high-performing school with weak administrators. I've never seen one. But the kind of leadership has to be this kind of engaged, adaptive leadership that shows up in the classroom and in the hallways, in the lunchroom, and everywhere else.
One final question from the audience. How do we who are serious about improving education for poor kids influence the rest?
So that's a great question to close with. And I think we need civic leadership in Rochester. Don't just leave it on the board. We need churches and all kinds of community organizations insisting we want better schools. We're going to invest in our kids. We're going to support our schools. And we're going to hold them accountable for results and for quality. Because we have no money to waste, and we have no children to waste. And so I think the engagement means we're going to watch closely what's going on. We're going to provide support where it's needed. There should be no trouble. I hear that this school is doing a great job of getting volunteers to work with and provide tutors and mentors. Well, all the kids in Rochester need that. You know, think about the kids who don't have parents or don't have parents who have time to be involved. Every child needs some adult who's looking out for them, some adult who's checking in on them. Those are ways in which the community can reinforce and support the schools. You've got a university as an example. There are other institutions in Rochester that can also be involved to support public education.
Before you end, would you care to just share with us what you'll be doing tomorrow?
So tomorrow I'm looking forward to spending a day visiting classrooms. I'm going to start the day talking to students. I always say it takes courage to talk to kids because they will tell the truth. They will tell you right now where they're learning and where they're not learning. Right? And the question is, the reason why it takes courage is once they tell you, what do you do about it? Right? And so I'm glad that that's a part of it because since they're not on the panel, I will get to hear from them because, you know, I ask the children right now, tell me where you're really being challenged. Tell me if there's an adult at this school you would turn to if you were faced with a problem. And if the answer is not being challenged, nobody to turn to, then we know what we've got to work on. So I'm glad that's part of it. Then I'm going to be talking to staff, and there's a workshop set up. So I'm looking forward to really kind of getting into the work here at East High School tomorrow.
I really appreciate that because it's more important for us that you'll be doing that work tomorrow than the time that you spent with us today here and the time on public broadcasting. We really appreciate your being part of our public discourse, but helping the real work get done means a great deal. So thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Nogueras.
And I just have to say, it's been an honor to be here, and I wish you all the very best in Rochester.
I would also add my thanks to our incredible and able panelists for helping to ground this conversation in our reality. Thank you very much. And then I would like to echo Ms. Green's comments, and I would like to thank the University of Rochester, and I would like to thank the Rochester City School Board, the vice president of which, Cynthia Elliott, is present, and I know that Commissioner Hallmark is present. And I'd like to thank the city government. I know that Councilmember Elaine Sproul is present. I would really like to thank our community leadership for being bold enough and courageous enough to take on this experiment, this opportunity to challenge this community's leading employer, one of its leading educational institutions, and my alma mater. To not just simply be engaged in the academic endeavor of education, but to be engaged in the hard work of changing how we approach education for our most vulnerable children. And I thank you for being here, because your presence sends a message that the university was right to do so, the school board was right to do so, and that you will continue to support them as they continue to work on behalf of our community's children. Thank you very much for being here. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Larry. On behalf of the mayor, who was going to be a panelist, but there's a mayoral debate tonight. She should be there. I want to present Pedro Noguera with a special token from the mayor, who could not be here, and she sends her best wishes and thank you for your support and our children of Rochester. So thank you. All right. Have a good night.